Well, hi, everyone. We're live. This is the ongoing emergency debate in Parliament, or I should say not formally an emergency debate, but the debate on the application of the Emergencies Act. And I'd like to just welcome you to my kind of home studio for doing speeches in the House of Commons. We've got a setup here where I'm going to make a few introductory remarks to you, those watching on my Facebook page. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to actually go live in the House of Commons, speaking as part of the virtual Parliament opportunity we have because of the circumstances right now to participate in the debate remotely instead of being physically in the House of Commons. And then after my speech, we're going to come back to speaking to you directly and actually answering your questions on this Facebook live stream. So please take the opportunity to watch and share this video. After I finish these introductory remarks, we'll break to the feed from the House of Commons directly, so you can watch my colleague Len Weber, an Conservative MP from Calgary, is going to finish his speech. He's going to take some questions and comments that follow his speech from other members. Then it will be my turn, and I'll have a 10-minute speech on the motion to confirm the emergency measures. Now, for those who don't know, the process for the Emergencies Act is the government declares an emergency, so-called, perhaps, or real, depending on your perspective. That emergency is in effect from the time the government declares it. But then the government has to bring a motion to Parliament effectively to confirm that that motion has taken place. So we're having that debate through the weekend, today, tomorrow, and Monday. The vote on that will be Monday night. And then if the vote is defeated, then the emergency stops. If the vote passes, then the emergency measures are confirmed and the emergency measures continue to be in place. So we are having this debate. It goes until midnight Eastern time, so 10 o'clock in Alberta. So I'll be giving effectively the last speech. So please, again, stay tuned after my speech is complete, and you can pose your questions, post in the comments your questions, your comments, and I'll be responding to those after my speech is over. So, and I'll just say, normally I would want to be doing this speech from the floor of the House of Commons. I much prefer being there in person, but my dear wife, Rebecca, is about 39 weeks pregnant. So I have permission from our party whip, kind of an exceptional circumstance, to be at home and available if things start to move on that front. But the circumstances of this virtual Parliament mean that I'm here at home, and I'm also able to be present and involved in the debate, asking questions and giving speeches. And just one other note about this home office setup I have. We found these curtains. I can't remember, where did we find these, Madeline? At IKEA. We found these curtains at IKEA, and we got them because they look pretty much exactly like the curtains that were in the back of the old chamber. So again, being someone that doesn't like virtual Parliament that much, doesn't like being away, I wanted to be able to simulate from home just as close as possible to the real experience. So I'm speaking in front of these yellow IKEA curtains that more or less look exactly like the curtains at the back of the House of Commons. So this is a critically important debate we're having, obviously, to respond to the government's emergency measures. And you'll hear my detailed remarks, 10-minute remarks, followed by questions and comments. So what we'll do now that I've given you this introduction, kind of explanation of what we're doing tonight, and again, encourage you to like and share this video so other people can be watching in real time. After I finish these remarks, we'll break to the House of Commons feed, so you can watch my colleague Len Weber just finishing up his comments, and then I'll be on speaking. My speech will start at about 9:45 Alberta time, 11:45 Eastern time, and then I'll speak for 10 minutes. Then there's a 5-minute period where other members from other parties will ask questions, make comments. I will respond to those comments. And then if there's time after me, but the House of Commons will adjourn at midnight Eastern time, so 10 o'clock Alberta time, so likely right after my speech is over. So we'll break to that House of Commons floor feed now. You'll see the speech, and then we'll break back. Feel free to be posting comments, questions, feedback in the meantime, and I look forward to responding to those after my speech is over.
Canadians cannot afford to build and entrench measures that silence Canadians when democratic governments around the world should be striving to do a better job of listening to their citizens. Governments often limit activities over time, but rarely do they go the opposite way. If you lose something to the state today, you'll likely not get it back anytime soon. So, Madam Speaker, I have listened. I have heard my constituents, and I certainly will not be voting for the use of the Emergencies Act at this time. And to my colleagues in the NDP caucus, I will let you know that I've had many NDP supporters in my riding that have written to me in dismay at their party in supporting this legislation. They realize the dangerous precedent this would set, and they are deeply concerned if this passes. They are concerned it will
Actually, the honourable member's time is up. I'm sure he'll be able to add during questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Louis.
The honourable deputy for Lac-Saint-Louis.
Remember when he read, in one of the letters he read from one of his constituents, the letter implied very strongly that what we saw for the last 3 weeks in the streets of Ottawa was legitimate protest. And the leaders of the protest have contended that they were just exercising their charter rights. Does the member agree that this was an illegal protest, which was what prompted the police action? And why is the official opposition not more critical of the leadership of this illegal protest?
The honourable member Calgary Confederation.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just want to continue my comments here before I quickly answer his question. First of all, to my NDP colleagues, my constituents are concerned that it will be dangerous precedent this would set, and they are really not impressed at all. While many of these NDP supporters in my writing have made it very clear in the past to me that they don't support the policies of my party on this matter, they are very appreciative of our responsible and principled decision. And so I'm asking, will the NDP colleagues in this House do the same? Regarding the question, the honourable member, thank you for the question. While I can understand your frustration with some of the actions of this Freedom Convoy protest, your actions go much too far with this Emergency Act. Freezing of bank accounts of anyone who participates in this protest and canceling their insurance, even if that person is completely non-violent and without a court or court order, no less, is fundamentally incompatible with the liberal democratic values that Canada is supposed to stand.
I'm sorry, I have a point of order. The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Louis.
The honourable member has completely ignored my question.
I'm sorry, that's not a point of order. That would be a point of debate, and I do want to remind the member that he's to address questions and comments through the chair and not directly to the members. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We hear a good deal from the Liberals that they want to help, they're proactive and so on. I would like to have the colleague comment on the fact that the Ottawa Police Force had requested 1,800 more agents and received from the RCMP only 275, of which only 20 were sent to help with the protest. Wouldn't that have been the right way to support the city?
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the question. Through you, of course, Madam Speaker. The question, it absolutely is good points to these questions, and I thank him for these points. The bottom line is, Madam Speaker, is that the current thresholds of this Emergency Act has not been met in this current situation, and the member does know that, I would hope. And that is the message that I'm leaving here to all these members in this House, that I clearly object to the motion and confirm a declaration of the emergency. We must use prudence and tolerance over power and force.
Question, the honourable member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I very much appreciated the honourable member expressing clearly he did not support illegal activities, but I wonder how he can gloss over the very frequent intimidation of businesses in Ottawa who are attempting to enforce mask mandates, or how he can endorse incidents like where one of my staff members was prevented from joining the train to go home until he removed his mask. This was not, by and large, a peaceful protest in downtown Ottawa. And how is he able to ignore the intimidation that resulted in the closure of over half the businesses in downtown Ottawa?
Brief answer from the member for Calgary Confederation.
Well, thank you to the honourable member. And absolutely, I don't endorse any of those actions. But let me summarize pretty much what a constituent of mine has seen throughout this whole process. Her name is Kirsten. And she has said, a group of Canadian citizens has a case that they want to bring up with their Prime Minister, but he won't listen to them because they disagree with him. So they decide to bring the message personally to him, and they are cheered along their way by their citizens. They come to Ottawa, but he still won't hear their case. He lets them wait for a couple of weeks, at which point the neighborhood where they are waiting gets irritated and they want him out. And perhaps because of some of the experiences that they have experienced as they...
Sorry, we do have a point of order here. L'honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Someone had a microphone that was open, or perhaps it was clothing, scratching on a microphone, which is preventing the interpreters from doing their work. And of course, that must be very difficult for them to hear that at this hour. I will also request, there do seem to be a few people speaking in the background just behind me. So I hope that they can be told to step away to speak elsewhere.
Up anyhow. So question, resuming debate, the honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, I guess the political left doesn't want to defund the police anymore. Speaker, this summer I was at a friend's party and I met a young couple who were in the process of making dramatic last-minute changes to their wedding plans. This couple had been planning to get married in the beautiful century-old Catholic church that was the heart and soul of the community of Morinville, Alberta. It was the church in which she had grown up. And yet this church had been burned to the ground a few weeks before in a likely act of arson, protest, and terror. Morinville is about a 45-minute drive from where I live. And on the morning after that fire, I had driven out to see the situation. When I got there, the fire was still burning. While I watched, local fire crews had to do the painful work of knocking down parts of the structure in order to preserve public safety and avoid the risk of further spread. In addition to the threat of a burning building, there was also a gas line under the church and apartments nearby. So although no one was hurt in this attack, the additional risk of an explosion to human life was very, very significant. This violent and dangerous act in Morinville was not an isolated incident. In the summer of last year, acts of arson destroyed more than a dozen churches of various denominations, with innumerable other acts of vandalism or attempted violence happening as well. The Prime Minister answered a question for media about what happened in Morinville, but did not proactively issue a single statement about this wild rampage of destruction in Western Canada. The Prime Minister's close friend and former advisor, Jerry Butts, called these acts understandable. Now, 2 days ago, there was an extremely violent attack on a Coastal GasLink pipeline worksite in BC. The responding RCMP officers were blocked from entering this road by spiked boards, downed and tarred stumps, and trees lit on fire, and then had smoke bombs and flaming sticks thrown at them. Meanwhile, additional violent protesters broke into the worksite armed with axes and flare guns. These protesters toppled heavy machinery, cut fuel lines, and smashed and set site vehicles on fire, with the workers still inside. About this incident, the public safety minister said, quote, "I am deeply concerned to hear reports of violent confrontations at a work site." Now, to this minister, respectfully, this wasn't a matter of violent confrontations. This was a premeditated, violent attack on working people who were just trying to do their jobs. So what is the climate in which such acts of violence against places of worship and against energy workers has come to take place here in Canada? The much venerated David Suzuki has said that pipelines will be blown up. The current sitting Minister of the Environment in this Liberal government once attacked the home of Alberta's then Premier Ralph Klein. He climbed on the roof of their private home as part of an activist stunt, apparently terrifying the Premier's wife, who was home alone at the time. Other members of this House, including the former leader of the Green Party, the former NDP MP who is now the Mayor of Vancouver, have been arrested for more benign acts of law-breaking. Madam Speaker, I believe in the rule of law. The rule of law means that everyone is equally bound by law and protected by law, whether they are sitting in a protest camp on Wellington Street or sitting in the federal cabinet, whether they drive a truck to work or work in the federal public service, whether they belong to a populist pro-Trump movement or a democratic socialist climate alarmist movement. Such people have an obligation to follow the law and also have a right to protection by it. When the law is selectively applied to penalize people based on their political views, that is, by definition, a violation of the rule of law. So while calling out illegal blockades of critical infrastructure and other forms of lawbreaking by protesters, we must also acknowledge that the rule of law is being threatened by a government that is woefully inconsistent in the way that they treat protesters, and that inconsistency is based on the political preferences and the biases of the people in power. And this brings the law into disrepute. At the heart of the idea of the rule of law is a contract. I will follow the law, and I will have the protection of law. When people are told to follow the law, but don't have the fair and equal protection of law, then we are no longer speaking of rule of law, but of rule by law. Rule of law is where the law rules. Rule by law is where laws are used by powerful people to dominate others. So we need to appreciate the difference. When the Oka crisis, 9/11, violent G7 and G20 protests, the blockades of 2 years ago, a series of attacks on places of worship, and violence targeting energy workers were not cause for the use of emergency powers. And then when this hammer is used to target working people engaged in civil disobedience in response to unjustified and unscientific vaccine mandates, when this happens, what we see is that the contract at the heart of what it means to be a rule of law society seems to be fraying. If I had seen the church I was about to get married in burned to the ground, if I had lost my job or access to vital services because of vaccine mandates, if I had seen acts of lawlessness ignored, defended, and even perpetrated by senior leaders in this country, then I would find it a little bit rich for the government to say that the current situation constitutes a unique national emergency. The contract at the heart of a rule of law society is fraying when we see a prime minister with an incredible personal record of corruption, the only prime minister in history to violate ethics law on multiple occasions, now claiming that other people should be subject to severe and disproportionate consequences for so much as donating to the convoy even weeks before any blockading began. Now, it seems to me that the most important question for Canada today is not just about the particulars of this moment, but it's about how did we get here? We got here because of the arbitrary and inconsistent application of decisions by the government, the demonization of people who disagree, and the decline of our democratic institutions, leading people to believe that their voice cannot be heard any other way. If we're going to come together as a country and address the pain and division that has been sown, then we have to ask ourselves, why the voice of a mother crying because her son lost his business and died by suicide because of COVID restrictions is not heard as loudly as the sound of a horn honking on Wellington Street? Why is it that a community of refugees from Egypt who had their house of worship burned to the ground in Surrey last year couldn't even get a statement from the Prime Minister, but potential for violence from this convoy led to a national state of emergency? We have to address the lack of empathy that clearly permeates our halls of power, and the lack of concern for working Canadians who have lost jobs and opportunity as a result of pandemic policies, as well as the broader attacks on their livelihood that we are seeing through government policy. Now, Madam Speaker, it may be hard for some people here to fully understand what many Canadians are going through, but I ask you all to spare a thought for people like the NDP leader's brother-in-law. The NDP leader might not be prepared to stand up for his brother-in-law, but I will be here to stand in the breach. Mr.
Sorry, we have a point of order for the honourable member for the Beauport-Limoilou. I go to her. I just want to maybe ask the honourable member to maybe adjust his boom just a little bit up a little bit, because we are getting some popping, and I'm not sure if that's what is probably causing a problem here. L'honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. My colleague is passionate, so he is speaking extremely quickly, and the interpreters are having trouble following him. I know that passion can be shared differently than through speaking so quickly. Very well. The honourable member of Sherwood Park, Saskatchewan, we ask you to slow down slightly just to make sure that the interpreters will be able to interpret the honourable member's speech.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I am very grateful to the interpreters for the important work they do. Mr. Dhaliwal donated $13,000 to the Freedom Convoy. After the fact, according to an NDP source, Mr. Dhaliwal has asked for his money back. This NDP source conveniently claims that there had been a misunderstanding about the true nature of the organization, which sounds like the sort of thing an NDP source would say. But regardless, let's take the NDP source at their word and suppose that Mr. Dhaliwal, who is the NDP leader's brother-in-law, donated as a result of a misunderstanding. Perhaps he accidentally clicked on the wrong GoFundMe page. Perhaps he donated $13,000 before he had had a chance to read the description. Let's say it's entirely true. And let's say that Mr. Dhaliwal wasn't the only one. I'm sure there are many everyday Canadians, just like Mr. Dhaliwal, who have donated to the convoy for various reasons. Because they oppose mandates, because they are concerned about the impact on supply chains, because they want to show support for truckers, or because of some sort of misunderstanding. I don't want Mr. Dhaliwal to have to worry about his bank account being frozen without a court order because of these emergency measures. The NDP might no longer be prepared to stand up for workers, for civil liberties, and for members of the NDP leader's own family, but Conservatives are prepared to step up when the NDP have let their own people down. And my colleagues have pointed out that the NDP and the Liberals are becoming almost exactly alike. But I do see one clear difference, because unlike the NDP leader, we know that the Prime Minister has a track record of doing a great deal to defend the financial interests of his family. Now, Mr. Speaker, in spite of the challenges we face, I am much more optimistic of the future of our country than I was 3 or 4 months ago. The convoy movement, with its complex cast of characters, with the presence of a few unsavory individuals, and with tens of thousands of people working for an end to mandates and a return to normal life, the convoy movement has led to a renewed interest in political involvement and participation within my constituency and across the country. It has inspired more Canadians to stand up for peace, order, and good government. Last night, I held a virtual town hall on short notice to discuss the Emergencies Act. There were over 300 participants, plus their family members and spouses. The message was overwhelming and confirming my decision to vote no. But participants also asked many good questions about how our democratic process works, how to influence change, and how they can get involved. Canadians do not want division, and they do not want lawlessness. They want a restoration of the rule of law through ordinary and lawful means, whereby both citizens and leaders respect human rights and follow the law, whereby the law is applied equally to all, regardless of their political views or status. They want an end to the mandates, and they want public health policies that are based on science. They want the ability to work and raise a family. Madam Speaker, the next convoy will not be a protest convoy, it will be a voters convoy. After this weekend, people will turn their attention towards learning about and engaging in the democratic process to defeat this divisive government and their NDP allies, and replace them with a government that will defend freedom, opportunity, and yes, the rule of law. God keep our land glorious.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I've listened quite extensively today to members of the Conservative Party, and their reactions to the blockade and the protesters, and just the amount of support that they continue to provide that group. The conflicting message: on the one hand, they say that they are against the blockades and they want people to go home, and then the worshiping of their actions, Madam Speaker. We have been consistent. The blockades have cost our communities a great deal, whether it was shutting down downtown Ottawa, the blockades for economic purposes, job losses at our borders, Manitoba, Alberta, Ontario. The need is there. And a good example with this enactment is the issue of children. Children were actually used as a part of the blockade. And I'm wondering if he could provide his thoughts about using children in illegal blockades. Does he support that too?
Parkford, Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, frankly, even from this member, I expect better. My position has been clear. Yes to peaceful protests. Yes to those calling for an end to mandates. No to illegal blockading of critical infrastructure. And I would say that consistently across the board, regardless of who's doing the blockades. And no to the arbitrary abuse of power by this government to target people who have so much as donated to the convoy movement long before any of the blockades have started. It should be a fairly simple principle, and it's one that members of the Liberals and the NDP maybe once used to understand, which is that you cannot justify any abuse of power by government simply because you disagree with the actions of some protesters.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Saint-Hubert, Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. We do see that this question has changed over the last 48 hours in as much as the truckers have left, and most of the protesters have left as well. We see among the NDP, the member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie, who has said on the news that if the truckers left, he might be able to rethink his decision. So I would like to know from our colleague whether, should the Prime Minister decide to allow a free vote on this important question, because he thinks that, now that the truckers have left, there would no longer be a matter of a national emergency. Might there be some, even among the Liberals, who might vote against this act?
Madam Speaker, I've been clear. I did not agree with the emergency measures being brought in the first place. I think law enforcement already had the tools that they needed, and I think that's been clear. But certainly now, it should be all the more evident, even to those who were maybe on the fence before, given that the blockades had the border blockades had either already ended or were well on their way to ending at the time the emergency measures were brought in. It would not make sense, certainly, to continue these emergency measures at any point past the protests and the blockades having ended. But I do want to be clear that I don't think there was any justification for bringing these measures in the first place and at any time.
And for a brief question, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, a brief question, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade, Export, Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the member from Sherwood Park, Port Saskatchewan, as a man of logic. So I'm going to put to him some logical issues that are troubling some of us on this side of the House. One is that the protesters have talked about the importance of freedom of expression and yet assaulted journalists. Secondly, the importance of being anti-lockdown and yet resulted in the lockdown of downtown Ottawa. And thirdly, just this idea that robust supply chains are critical and then block supply chains in his own province of Alberta. Does he understand the reticence on this side of the House to dialogue with people who are engaging in such illegal activities?
The honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan, brief question, answer, please. Sorry.
Madam Chair, in any other situation, that member would understand how problematic it is to cast such broad generalizations about groups of people, as if the protesters had all assaulted journalists, as if the protesters had all engaged in border blockade. This is utter nonsense. The member should know that tens of thousands of people have gone out across this country to engage in protests about these unjustifiable mandates. Many have done so peacefully. Many have done so having no sympathy whatsoever for blockading. I deplore any violence, of course. I hear that a journalist was pepper sprayed by somebody, or perhaps by law enforcement or by somebody else. And any attacks on journalists are totally unacceptable, regardless of who they're coming from. But this is not representative of the
Right, yeah. It being 12:28 a.m. pursuant to order made sorry. Sorry. 12:02 a.m. It being pursuant to order made Thursday, February 17th, 2022, having reached the expiry of the time provided for today's debate, the House will resume consideration of the motion for confirmation at the next sitting of the House. En conséquence, la Chambre demeure.
Accordingly, this House stands adjourned until tomorrow, or rather until later this day at 7 a.m. pursuant to order made Thursday, February 17th, 2022.
Can you take questions? Hi, everyone. Okay, so you just will have seen the speech I was giving in the House of Commons, and wow, I see that we've got about 1,000 people following along. This is great. Please share this video. We've got such an important message that we want to share with you as we continue to get the message out about this debate that's happening. So debate just wrapped up after I spoke. There will be more debate tomorrow from 7 a.m. to midnight Eastern time. So if you're here in Alberta with me, 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. And you can follow that debate along, watch many other Conservative members of other parties debate. There'll be more debate on Monday and then a vote Monday night. There's some interesting context happening here because one of the things that's clear, I think, is that the NDP is under a lot of pressure, and this may impact the vote on Monday. So especially if you're watching from another part of the country and you have an NDP member of parliament in your riding, make sure you reach out to your member of parliament, because there's some former MPs, prominent former MP named Sven Robinson, someone who I never expected to be agreeing with, but here we are. He's speaking out against the NDP's position, supporting this so-called emergency declaration. Former MP Aaron Weir. There have been a couple members of the NDP caucus who have made public comments that suggest they're kind of uncomfortable with what's going on. So interesting circumstances where, of course, if the NDP change their position and decide to vote against the confirmation of this emergency, then it's not going to pass, and the emergency declaration will immediately stop. So interesting times there in terms of the shifting. I would have thought maybe 24 hours ago that this we were going to have the debate, but the vote was going to pass because the Liberals and the NDP were locked in voting in favor of that declaration. Now it's much more potentially up in the air. So interesting times. Important again, if you can be sharing the video and just helping us get the word out about this important issue, and also sharing the video clips and following the debate. If you don't normally watch what happens at Parliament, I mean, we bring you good content here on my page. Make sure you're following the page, of course. But cpac.ca is the live feed from the floor of the House of Commons. So anytime the House of Commons is in session, you can watch at cpac.ca. Now, I promised you after we wrapped up, I would be keen to answer your questions. So I'm just going to watch here. We've got some comments coming in. People saying different things about the speech. Thank you so much for that. If people have specific questions they want to ask, things they want to know about, Mandy Whiten is just pointing out the NDP is the tiebreaker. That's exactly right. And we had some people asking also questions about non-confidence motions and how that works. Justin Trudeau remains the prime minister as long as he maintains what's called the confidence of the House of Commons, which means that a majority of members of parliament would vote to sustain his government. So theoretically, we or other parties could put forward a non-confidence motion at any time. The issue is it wouldn't pass because the NDP and the Liberals, though not sort of formally on paper, they're kind of acting like close allies and partners, like a coalition. And we see this with the Emergencies Act, that the NDP is voting with the Liberals, or planning to vote with the Liberals, at least that's where we thought they were, in order to confirm this emergency. So the NDP plays that potential swing vote role here, and that's really important. Justin is just correcting me, saying not tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands. Please stop downplaying the size of this movement. Fair enough, Justin. I mean, there have been lots of different protests across the country, people coming out. I have no doubt that you're right, that there have been hundreds of thousands of people involved in various ways. And Philip is saying, end all mandates. I totally agree. We're working to end the federal mandates. We're speaking out against the air travel mandates, the public service mandates, as well as the border mandate for truckers. Those are the things that we can deal with at the federal level. Okay, I want to read out this comment because I understand not everybody agrees. And Sean DeSaltis, thanks for watching. Just scrolled away from it though. I meant to read your comment here, and I lost track of it. I'm sorry, the scroll. But you were saying that basically you were disappointed because you see the Conservative Party as being the party of law and order, and what's happening in this case. Well, let me just be clear that our party supports law and order. We support peaceful protesting. We've encouraged people to protest peacefully. We've spoken out against blockades of critical infrastructure. We've done that in every case. But we also believe, as I said in the speech I gave, that law and order has to be a two-way street. We expect protesters and citizens to follow law, and we expect the government to treat people in accordance with the law. And I don't believe that it's inconsistent with the Emergencies Act to claim that we're in an emergency, which doesn't really rise to the threshold of the act, and then to use the powers that come from that to be seizing people's bank accounts, or freezing people's bank accounts, I should say. This is not appropriate. Corinne is asking about whether MPs are allowed to kind of vote their conscience across party lines. Essentially, I think the implication of that question is, could we see Liberal MPs, NDP MPs stand up and vote against the emergency? Now, the way the rules of Parliament work are, notionally, anybody can vote however they want on anything. It comes down to what kind of pressure they might face from within their party. What kinds of things might happen to them as a result of their party whip. If people vote against their party line, they can be removed from committees. They can be denied the opportunity to travel, things like that. So the party whips exert that kind of pressure on individual MPs. But MPs have the power, the ability to take a stand that's different from their party all the same. So I would just encourage MPs on the Liberal side, the NDP side, to really think about what's going on. And we've seen some MPs, such as Joel Lightbound from the Liberal caucus, actually speak out against the divisive approach being taken by his own Prime Minister. Someone's asking, is it true that we can email the Honourable Mary Simon with a non-confidence vote for Justin Trudeau? Sherry, no, it's not. The Governor General's job is to recognize the Prime Minister who has the confidence of the House of Commons. So the Governor General doesn't choose who the Prime Minister is, in a sense that the Governor General recognizes the person who has the confidence of the House of Commons. So in this case, there's no doubt that Justin Trudeau is the person who should be the Prime Minister according to Canadian law and Constitution, because he has the confidence of the House of Commons. The way he would cease to be Prime Minister, it's not through the Governor General. It would be through either members of Parliament expressing a lack of confidence in him, or an election in which the configuration in Parliament would change. Somebody was asking about where Justin Trudeau was during the debate. Justin Trudeau kicked off the debate. He gave the very first speech on the Emergencies Act, and that was given on Thursday morning. And then shortly after him, Candice Bergen, the Conservative leader, also gave a speech. So you have the Prime Minister, the Public Safety Minister, Marco Mendicino, and Candice giving speeches. I don't think the Prime Minister has been present for much of the rest of the debate. I'm not entirely sure about that. Someone's asking, why has not one premier lifted all mandates? So my focus at the federal level is obviously on the federal mandates, but we are seeing the lifting of restrictions at the provincial level as well. I know Alberta, Saskatchewan, I believe Ontario has announced a timeline for lifting mandates. I think there's been some announcements in other provinces as well. What we put forward last week is a motion before the House of Commons, a motion calling on the government to put forward a plan to end mandates. And that motion was voted on Monday of this past week. It was supported by Conservatives and the Bloc. The Bloc have been voting with us on certain things related to this now, although they're, you never quite know with them. But the NDP and the Liberals kind of acting as a bloc, working together. And then they voted against forcing the government to come forward with a plan for mandates. Philip had just asked if I get to continue the debate tomorrow. So my speech has wrapped up. I gave a 10-minute speech, then 5 minutes questions and comments, and then that was the end of my time. So there will be other members who will continue. If you're interested in following this more, you can go on again, cpac.ca is where you'll be able to watch all of the debate. Elise Page is asking, when is the next election? We have a minority parliament, so the next election timing is not easy to predict. It depends on at what point either the Prime Minister calls an election, or when there is a vote of non-confidence, where a majority of members of Parliament vote to say they no longer have confidence in the Prime Minister. Notionally, that could happen at any time, but we're seeing kind of the Liberals and the NDP working together. They're becoming more and more like-minded. A lot of people were surprised to see the NDP endorsing these draconian measures against workers who are protesting. The NDP likes to talk about itself as a party of civil liberties, and many people within the NDP outside of Parliament have been critical of the approach that has been taken. But the reality is, what we're seeing right now is this effective coalition between the Liberals and the NDP. Someone else is asking, what can we do to work to end the mandates? Folks, I just encourage you to reach out to your local member of Parliament wherever you live. Talk to them about the importance of bringing mandates to an end. Make the arguments, share some of this content, and also things like sharing some of the content from my page. We've posted a lot of content recently explaining the issues about mandates. For me, that the clinching argument against the travel mandate specifically is we have the opportunity as members of Parliament to submit what are called written questions. So these are, you see the kind of verbal questions, question period we ask, but a written question is when you were able to submit a written question to the government. And my colleague, Dean Allison, Conservative member of Parliament from Ontario, submitted a question asking for a whole bunch of data about travel-based submission to understand, okay, what were the levels of transmission of COVID on airplanes before mandates were brought in, during the kind of interim phase where testing was allowed as an alternative, and then after when you had to be vaccinated to fly. What were the rates of transmission in each of those periods, so that you could kind of compare those issues. And in this response to this detailed request for data, the government replied and they said, hey, actually, we don't gather data on travel-based submission of COVID-19. So just from that answer right away, we know that their decisions around travel mandates for air travel at the border are not based on data, because they're not collecting the data. If they were collecting data to say, okay, this many COVID cases, this was the rate of transmission that occurred on airplanes, then they would be able to say, okay, what are the different measures we've had in place, what's working and what isn't, and so forth. But they're not doing that. They're not collecting the data. So again, clearly there's no there's no basis for these mandates when they're not even collecting the data that would be used to justify it. Marie is asking, what were the rates of COVID truckers brought in? Just following up, Marie, thanks for the question. Just as I was saying, right, the government's not collecting this data, but we know that truckers work alone, and there has been an exemption for truckers that lasted right up until the middle of January. They weren't subject to normal border measures, obviously, because they need to bring vital goods back and forth across the border. And for most of the period of the pandemic, of course, there were vaccines weren't even available. But then the government brought in this mandate at a late stage for folks who are working alone. Yes, they stop places, they go into restaurants, but when they stop places or go into restaurants, whatever it is, they're subject to the same provincial rules that everybody else is subject to. So clearly it doesn't make any sense. Let me just take one more question. Esther is asking what is being done about police violence. Esther, I've seen some concerning posts and videos, and I think it will be important for these things to be looked into and for information to be gathered in the various cases. I don't want, as a politician, to be jumping to conclusions here, but people's civil liberties should be protected, and there should be investigations in cases where the circumstances warrant it. But I do want to say as well, look, the police are in a very challenging situation. I think many police officers would never have expected to be put in the kind of situation they've been put in by the government. So I do I do think let's be understanding of the challenging circumstances that police officers face. The real issue here is that Justin Trudeau never should have let it get to this point. If he had been willing to engage, to listen, to understand, to make the right decisions on mandates, not because of the protesters, but just to look at the evidence and make the right decisions on mandates, it never would have gotten to this point. The Prime Minister's decision to bring in an arbitrary mandate targeting truckers with no evidence whatsoever associated with it, to bring that in at the beginning of this year, it understandably really touched a nerve for a lot of people that were losing their jobs and afraid of the impacts that this would have on their access to essential goods. And that's what really sparked this movement of people that were concerned and were looking for change. So I'll wrap it up there, folks. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen and be part of this conversation. Please again, share this video and some of the information around it. We will clip parts of the speech I just gave in shorter clips that people can see and share individually. And you can watch cpac.ca for more of this debate. Important debate. There is a vote Monday night. If you haven't already, please take the opportunity to reach out to your member of parliament, whatever party they are. Don't assume that they're not on your side just because they're from a different party. Reach out to them, talk to them, make sure they know what your views are. Because if Liberal MPs, NDP MPs get hundreds and thousands of phone calls, I know I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of phone calls. This may be the biggest issues we've ever heard from people on, certainly within a short space of time. We had 300 people plus at a town hall in my riding last night. So I know lots of people are engaged, but my message would be, wherever you live, even if your MP is not from the Conservative Party, still take the time to reach out to them and encourage them to do the right thing in the vote on Monday. So everyone, thanks so much for watching. Again, please follow my page. We'll have more of those shorter clips coming up soon and regular updates as we prepare for Monday's vote. I'll also be live streaming Monday's vote as well, so you can be prepared to watch that vote on Monday. And I'll be remote and I'll be bringing you those live updates as the vote unfolds. I think given the internal pressure within the NDP, given even some of the Liberal MPs having spoken out against their own government on their approach to mandates, this could be a more interesting vote than usual. Normally, it's just a very simple, cookie cutter, this party this way, this party this way. It could be a little more interesting than that. So we'll be live on Monday with that vote. And tune in the meantime. The debate will continue all day tomorrow from 7 a.m. to midnight Ontario time, and throughout the day on Monday as well before the vote. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great evening.